to all members of the Fierce Leader group. So we're following our journey for the 60 days of deconditioning on everything about relationships, society, patterns, childhood, whatever you think of when you think of the word deconditioning. So there is something, as I dive deeper into conflict and into peace building, I would say it's more at this point we're going a little bit outside the scope of mediation and we're looking more globally peace building. The more I dive into that, the more I see kind of this idea that we believe maybe if there is peace, that means there is no conflict. And so we misunderstand the concept of peace, we misunderstand the concept of conflict resolution, conflict management, as it's either or. We can't have peace if there is conflict, and if there is conflict, there is war necessarily, then peace can't be there. And so when you look at different organizations and international organizations, what the work they do, the mission they have, and what I feel is more realistic to just thinking, well, I want just to solve all the conflict in the world, is not solving all the conflict, just at least the conflict that are going to arise because of the human nature, that those conflicts are having minimum damages. And so conflict has been observed as having different scales, different intensities. And so you may have just a simple arguments, it's already considered into the conflict pattern, but it's a low intensity conflict. So when you have just a disagreement or you're arguing with someone, it's a minimum scale of conflict. It's not as less important because if not addressed, it can escalate very quickly and very easily. But compared to, like, on the scale of conflict, having an argument is on the lower side of conflict. Of course, when you look at wars are the highest of conflict scale. So the idea is not to think of conflict as it's something we have to eradicate. It's something that we have to learn to cancel, like to create such peace that there wouldn't be any conflict anymore. And I love movies that are in that dystopia story where they create a society, an alternative society, and you have the books like Fahrenheit 451 or the year 1964. Those books also talk about that. But whenever you have a dystopia in a movie or in a book, usually it's a society that is being imagined as being perfect, as the movie, for example, The Giver, a perfect example of dystopia, where we create a society where we think we have to eradicate all possible source of conflict. And I feel that by having that approach is actually not accurate and is not realistic, because we forget the emotional nature of humans and the needs of humans. And so you're gonna have, look at children, they fight over a toy, they fight over possession, they fight over having their own bedroom, so territory. And so we think about that as would be a goal to eradicate all conflict and all sorts of conflict, and to have everybody understanding there is better ways to handle situations, and there is better ways to handle situations. But what I feel is more accurate to consider that, okay, conflict is always going to be there. Conflict is always going to happen, and there is always going to be someone that seeks the conflict to reevaluate the dynamic in a relationship, the dynamic. So a relationship, interpersonal relationship, or dynamic between countries, between communities. And so this reevaluation is ultimately putting the conflict on stage. And so The goal is then to understand what processes we can put in place in order for those conflict to not escalate in a more anarchy pattern, but more evolution of the conflict as a transformation to progress. And so considering the conflict as the seed of progress, the seed of transformation, and the seed of understanding, of improvement. And so in that concept, we're not seeking at eradicating conflict. We're not seeking at making conflict non-existent. We're looking at using it as fuel for transformation, as fuel for process, and fuel for improvement, for progress. So it's a difference between simple conflict resolution session and walking toward a peace building. And so at different scales, because you're going to have in a home, so where mediation most likely occurs in homes, in businesses, between institutions, and certain mediation go a little bigger scale when you're dealing with a governmental institution. But then the more you go up the scale, the more you consider globally, internationally, what processes are in place in order for the peace to be cultivated. And so what communication do we need to have between communities? What processes do we need to create and implement within different organizations in order to promote that peace building? And so that's just a quick note, as we need to rethink what making peace is, what resolution, what conflict management means. I think there is this misunderstanding that if we live in peace, that means there is no conflict at all, that it's very peaceful. I think it's not accurate, and it's not realistic to see this way. And again, I think the movie The Giver is a perfect example on how seeking peace is actually canceling the emotional nature of humans. And so we need just to find that balance between everything, and just being aware by analyzing the different datas on how the conflict escalates, and the needs and the interest of everybody, and kind of jungling with all of this. So maybe that will help you to reconsider, what conflict means, and maybe that will also help to release the pressure that whenever conflict arises, oh my God, it has to be solved right away. And it's not necessarily the goal, is more not letting it escalate so far that we get human damages and long-term damages. So just some insight about that, and I'll let you tell me what you think about it in comment. Have a nice day, and I talk to you soon. Bye.